जी हैं ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੇਖ ਰਹੇ ਹੋ ਅੱਜ ਕੱਲ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਸਾਂਝੀ ਸੋਚ ਟੀਵੀ ਤੇ ਮੈਂ ਇੰਦਰਜੀਤ ਕਾਲੀਰਾਏ ਅੱਜ ਕੱਲ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਤੇ ਆਪਣੀ ਗੱਲ ਚੱਲ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਜੋ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਦੇ ਹਾਲਾਤ ਹੈਗੇ ਨੇ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਬਾਹਰ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਦੇ ਵਾਸੀ ਹੈਗੇ ਨੇ ਸਿਟੀਜ਼ਨ ਜਾਂ ਗ੍ਰੀਨ ਕਾਰਡ ਹੋਲਡਰ ਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇਕਾਨਮੀ ਦੀ ਕਾਫੀ ਇੰਟਰਸਟ ਹੈਗੀ ਹੈ ਇਕਾਨਮੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਰੀਅਲ ਏਸਟੇਟ ਆ ਘਰ ਆਪਾਂ ਖਰੀਦਦੇ ਆ ਆਪਣੇ ਰਹਿائش ਵਾਸਤੇ ਉਹ ਮਹਿੰਗੇ ਹੋਈ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਨੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਮੌਰਗੇਜ ਕਮ ਮਿਲਦੀ ਆ ਵਿਆਜ ਵਧੀ ਜਾ ਰਹੇ ਆ ਇਹ ਇਸ਼ੂਜ਼ ਆਪਣੇ ਹਰੇਕ ਪਰਿਵਾਰ ਨੂੰ ਮਸਲਾ ਦੇ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ ਅੱਜ ਆਪਣੇ ਨਾਲ ਜੁੜੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਨੇ ਤਾਜ ਗਿੱਲ ਇਹ ਰੀਅਲਟਰ ਹੈਗੇ ਨੇ ਪਰ ਇਹ ਰੀਅਲਟਰ ਹੈਗੇ ਨੇ ਇੰਗਲੈਂਡ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਆਪਾਂ ਅੱਜ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਨੀ ਹੈ ਵੀ ਰੀਅਲ ਏਸਟੇਟ ਮਾਰਕੀਟ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਦੀ ਆ ਤੇ ਇੰਗਲੈਂਡ ਦੀ ਆ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੀ ਫਰਕ ਹੈ ਅੱਜ ਕੱਲ ਗੱਲ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਕਰਨੀ ਆ ਇਹ ਤਾਂ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ ਕਰਕੇ ਕਈ ਇੰਗਲੈਂਡ ਤੋਂ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਆਉਣਾ ਮੰਗਦੇ ਨੇ ਔਰ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਆਪਣੇ ਕਈ ਫੈਮਲੀਜ਼ ਹੈਗੀਆਂ ਜੋ ਸੋਚਦੇ ਵੀ ਹੋਊਗੇ ਵੀ ਇੰਗਲੈਂਡ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਅਸੀਂ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਰਹਿائش ਕਰੀਏ ਉੱਥੇ ਰਹੀਏ ਆਪਣੇ ਕਾਫੀ ਪਰਿਵਾਰ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਇੰਗਲੈਂਡ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੈਗੇ ਨੇ ਫੈਮਲੀਜ਼ ਆਪਾਂ ਆਈ ਜਾਈਦਾ ਆਓ ਗੱਲ ਕਰੀਏ ਤਾਜ ਗਿੱਲ ਨਾਲ ਜੋ ਇੰਗਲੈਂਡ ਦੀ ਰੀਅਲ ਏਸਟੇਟ ਮਾਰਕੀਟ ਹੈਗੀ ਹੈ welcome to Ajkal America, Taj. Yes, we're cousins, so we'll get that full disclosure out there. But what I want to talk to you about as a realtor from England is the differences that exist within the real estate market. Now, first of
Mm-hmm.
all, I want to address mortgages. I was in
Mm-hmm.
England over 35 years ago. I had a house, I bought it. I understand what the market was 35 years ago when I applied for a
Mm-hmm.
mortgage and everything. But having come to America and bought properties here, I understand the American mortgage market is significantly different than the UK or the Canadian. So give us an insight onto a new family who's looking to buy a house in England. I know you're in the city of Derby, which is in the center of
Mm-hmm.
England, but
Yeah.
there's market impacts on pricing. Houses in London obviously are expected to be costing more, Birmingham, Edinburgh. So there are key metropolitan areas where prices will be higher than Derby. But as a country, how is this market impacting inflation, interest rates? But let's first talk about a young family who comes to you
Yeah.
and they want to buy their first home. What's their challenges on a
Mhm.
mortgage?
Okay. Okay. Um, First of all, thank you for inviting me, and Sasri Kal to all the viewers, whoever you may be. So yeah, as Paji just introduced me, I am a realtor, estate agent, as we say in the UK. I was also a mortgage intermediary, practicing for the last 4 years. So yes, it's a topic which has been very very important for everybody in the UK, especially first time buyers, especially those that basically want to get on the property ladder. So you know, I can sort of share my thoughts on that area with you all. Um, if we just look at the first time buyer, as Buddy you just said, somebody coming to look to buy a property in the UK first time, especially being from overseas. And a good example is the medics we have that are working in the hospital in Derby. A lot of them come from overseas, either Pakistan, Afghanistan, or India, and they're here on a contract with the Royal Derby Hospital, which is a few years and it can be extended. And what they find is they can't just jump into the marketplace because from a banking perspective, you've got to have some history about yourselves. Now, someone coming new into the country obviously does not have that. And if you look at a mortgage application is always going to require your credit file to be assessed. And if your credit file is not there, it doesn't have a good score. you've got no real history of actually living in the country, then you've got no chance of actually getting mortgage finance. So a lot of these people who come into the country initially, and when they used to come to me, I would say to them first that, look, you're going to have to rent, you're going to have to go into the private rented sector. Um, and there's been a lot of changes there as well. We'll come on to that, but the private rented sector is their only option. And since COVID, March 2020, rents have gone through the roof, and that's been proportional everywhere across the country, and Derby's been no different. So someone coming first into the country has got to get a rental property first. They won't be able to get a mortgage. Now, I used to say to all my clients, especially those that came to the country, that you're going to have to rent for 2 years. You're going to have to show a history that you've been renting for 2 years, you've been paying your rent, you've had no defaults on that rent either, because the banks will look at that. And then after 2 years, you've built up, a footing in the country. You've also built up a credit file position now, because you've been paying bills, you've been paying utility bills, you've been paying credit card bills, you've been paying all sorts of bills, and these all get reflected on your credit file, and that's what the banks want to see, because your credit file is your financial blueprint. And everyone who's going to be seeking mortgage finance, that's the key thing. You've got to have a good credit file for banks to entertain you as a customer. So I think, when I look back and I look at all the mortgages we did with a number of clients, um, a lot of the people that we dealt with, they were disappointed at the start, because they used to say to us, well, I want to actually buy, I don't want to be renting. But it's like in the UK, and it'll be no different to the States. You got to have a deposit, and if you're a residential individual looking to buy and be, your own home, you can effectively borrow, minimum 90% loan to value, ideally 85%. But the more deposit you can put down, the better. And especially since COVID, the rates have gone up. When base rates were 0.1%, I mean, who remembers that? I mean, I do. I mean, that was, back in 2019, UK base rates 0.1%. And then COVID came and changed the landscape completely. And then obviously with quantitative easing, that was, coordinated by the Bank of England, printing money and basically pumping it into the economy to stabilize the economy. The interest rates, after COVID, started to increase. And that was driven by inflation. And inflation really, really skyrocketed in the UK. It hit something like double digits, and it's taken all these years now since 2020 to get inflation down to just over 2%, and that's the Bank of England target. So during that period, we had a rapid increase in inflation. Obviously, base rates went from 0.1% to 5.25%. Um, and now effectively, we had a quarter point cut. But during that period, mortgages became very expensive. So what that did is, if you're a first time buyer, effectively your affordability is now completely maxed out. And if you look at the affordability today of someone trying to buy a property, it's averaging 8.3 times your annual income, and that's a lot. So, and if you're a single person, that's going to be hard. You really need to be a couple, because if you're both working, then that's going to help, because you've got other bills, other finances to pay. So it's there's a lot of things for people to consider coming into the country in the last few years and even today, that you've got to build up a history. You've got to be renting for at least a couple of years. Build your credit file up, save your deposit, and then when you're ready, when you've got all those, all your eggs in the basket. You got your deposit, you got your credit file, you got a history. Then I would say, you're ready to sort of dip into the property market and look at sort of purchasing. But even so, prices haven't really fallen a hell of a lot. Um, that's one
Well,
thing I would say.
let's feed off some of the topics that you've just brought up, Taj.
Right.
Um, what you mentioned is inflation. What you mentioned is interest rates and building a credit history. Credit history, totally get it, coming new to the country. But interest rates, um,
Mm,
what is the current interest rate for buying a house in England uh, overall? I recall back in 73,
mm,
74, my parents bought a house in England and the interest rate was 17%.
yes.
The
Yeah.
market has changed a lot since then. When I
Correct.
came to America, the first house I bought was 12%. And what I want to
Yeah.
talk to you about is one, in the interest rates, two, the type of mortgages. In America, most of the mortgages that we get are fixed rate. So those people who were lucky and they got a 2% mortgage, they have for 30 years fixed a 2% interest rate on that mortgage. And what we're also finding is those people are very reluctant to sell their houses or refinance their houses because they don't want to
Hmm.
lose that icing on the cake of a 2% mortgage interest rate at
Yeah.
this particular time. American mortgage rates are running like 7, 8%. They were. You guys
Mm,
got a Bank of England rate cut. We in America did not. So there's a lot of factors. But first, regardless of coming fresh to the country, trying to buy a house, or having a young family who's lived and grown up in England, what could be an interest rate, and is it fixed for the term of the mortgage or is it adjustable, or how does it work? In the
yeah.
US we have fixed rate mortgages, which most people go for. We
Correct.
have adjustable
Yep.
rate mortgages, and then we have what we call a 1.5 or a 2.5 7 arm. That rate
Yeah.
is a teaser rate at the beginning. It goes up every
Correct.
adjustable period, but there's a
Yeah.
cap on it. So, for argument's
Yeah.
sake, I
Yeah.
might be able to get a mortgage today of 5%. Next year, it goes to 6%. But I know there's a
Yeah.
cap on that mortgage that when it reaches the cap, it will never go up that beyond that. So,
Yeah.
it may be a 5 cap. So, I get 5 today, but the highest it can go is 10%. Is there what are the sort of market factors in
Yeah.
England? How does that work?
Yeah. I mean, Baji, our mortgage products are no dissimilar to what you've got in the States. So generally, um, we've got the fixed product where you basically you take out a mortgage, 2 year deal, 5 year deal, or a 10 year deal. Average generally in the UK, people will always, if they're going to go for a mortgage, they're either going to look at a fixed product because they want a fixed budget each month, and that will usually be for a 2 year. 2 years are very popular, or a 5 year. Now, I always used to say to clients that look, you really want to look at when you pick your mortgage product, you want to make sure life doesn't get in the way. And what I mean is, things do change. People may not like the area. People may decide, they don't want to be together. So then, if you fixed a 5 year deal and then you got things are changing in 2 years, then you're stuck with redemption penalties. So I always say to clients, always look at what you feel is good for you. But fixed is a popular mortgage product. Um, Alongside that is the standard variable rate product as well, or a tracker product. And the difference between the two is a standard variable rate is a product which basically is the rate that the bank actually offers. So let's say Barclays is an example. Barclays would basically offer you a mortgage at their SVR rate, standard variable rate. Um, and then effectively, you'd also have the option, if you didn't want that, you could have a tracker. and the tracker would basically track the Bank of England base rate. So whatever the Bank of England base rate did, if it went up or down, the tracker would mirror that. So they're the options. And then, as you alluded to, we also have a collar and a cap. So people could have a mortgage whereby they're capped at a certain rate, and there's a collar as well. There's a lower rate. But over the years, when I did mortgages, the only type of mortgages I really actually wrote for clients was either stand base rate tracker mortgages or fixed, and I'd say basically 90% were fixed, and then probably 10% were on tracker rates. So you can see the popularity in the mortgages were generally more geared towards having a fixed rate product, and it's either a 2 year deal here or a 5 year deal. Now, I think in America, you can go, you guys, I think, go back even further, 20 years, 30 years.
Well,
But
just interrupt on you with the answer to that, Taj. When we get a mortgage here, we can get a 30-year fixed mortgage or a 40-year fixed mortgage. And then the adjustable, it
yeah,
can be a 5 year or a 7 year with a cap on it. I want to follow up on your sort of life getting in the way comment. I think that happens all the time. But what I'm
yeah,
sensing is if you have a mortgage that's got a 2 year fixed or a 5 year fixed, what happens after that? Is that the end of the mortgage? I got to get a new mortgage, or does it roll over into a variable mortgage or a fixed mortgage? What
yeah,
happens after that?
yeah,
Because
yeah. It would roll
if I
over
get a
into a
mortgage,
variable.
okay,
Yeah,
because in the US, if we don't do anything, our mortgages will roll up to a 30-year. It's usually rated as an adjustable, but we get sort of our monthly payments adjusted, so it's rate worked out for the whole 30-year payoff. At the end of this period, whatever we've been paying, it may adjust every year, amortization periods, but at the end of 30 years, we should not have a balance left. But moving on from
yeah,
that, um, I think there's a basic understanding of the mortgage industry there. ਹੁਣ ਗੱਲ ਕਰੀਏ ਆਪਣੇ real estate ਦੀ market ਕੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਹੈ. So Taj, give us a feeling. You mentioned COVID and housing prices and the so-called printing of money by governments in the UK, Canada, and America and other places to deal with this COVID crisis. But now we're out of it.
mm,
We're pretty much COVID free. There are still breaks of that. Where is the British real estate market? And the one reason is the population of England has definitely grown over time. The land mass is always going to be fixed in England or any other place because, at least in England, it's an island. It's surrounded by
yeah,
water, whichever way you go. The number of houses you can build in England and the
yeah,
agricultural use of land and the residential zonings and everything else, they all impact, um, property markets. What is the increased rates that we've seen in the UK from, let's say, 2020 to 2024? And now that you guys have had a change of government a few weeks back, what is the
mhm,
anticipation of the people in the industry, professionals like you, and what is the future outlook for buyers in that market? Are they expecting a
okay,
higher property price increase? Are they expecting prices to come down? Are there going to be any corrections? Just general outlook for anybody buying a
mm,
house in the next 12 months.
okay, okay. So just to answer your first part, I think since COVID, um, we had a really busy 18 months when COVID hit the market. Prices really did go, quite high, and that was across the country. Um, and people were buying, and whatever you listed, basically within weeks, you had an offer agreed. And then in the I'd say last 18 months, so probably from 23, January to now, um, that bubble burst, and it's been very stagnant here. And house price inflation is probably being, probably around the 1% mark on the year. So prices sort of stagnated. It moved from a seller's market to a buyer's market. So buyers are basically now, more in control, um, with prices, and they were able to negotiate as well. So what we've seen in the last, probably I'd say in the last 6 months, is price reductions. So estate agents, still valuing properties higher than they need to be, and then consequently they've been sitting on the market. There's been no movement, probably, after 8 weeks, and then 12 weeks, and then 16 weeks, and then there's been price reductions, and that's been quite common across the board. So it's been good for buyers in that respect. So they've been able to renegotiate prices on properties. Um, but now, since we've had that, generally you get the spring market, which we've just came out of, and now we're in the summer market. You're always going to see a bit of buoyancy anyway in the marketplace. But something interesting has come out today, and I don't disagree with it, because if you look at Zoopla is a portal, um, that lists properties, and they've come out with a report, and they've said basically the housing market is set for a busy autumn, and homes listed are up, and stock is up 14%, and over the last 7 years, we're on a 7-year high compared to what's happened in the last, let's say, 18 months. So what they're trying to say is that more and more homeowners, vendors, as we call them, are listing properties now. They're expecting the autumn market to be quite busy. I'm seeing probably, a lot more vendors, sellers coming on the market as well. Um, but from a buying perspective, prices won't be they won't be as what we've experienced, post COVID. They are flat. You've got to price competitively. I've always said this to many a homeowner, that if you want to list your property on the market, you know, do get this right. The pricing is key, because if you get the pricing right, you will get interest very quickly, and then your property will be under offer. And within the period in the UK, we always look at is, from listing to completion, you shouldn't be more than 4 months, 16 weeks. So if you get the pricing right, then that's what you'll expect. And I think in the next term, in the few months now coming into the autumn period, more and more vendors are listing, more sellers are listing properties. So there'll be more stock there for buyers. And the issue we've had, Baji, is, there's been a lack of stock on the market, which has sort of dominoed, even the private rented sector as well, because people who, wanted to buy, they couldn't really buy, because there's not the availability of stock around. So that has obviously going to be changing now. There'll be more stock available, and the key thing is making sure it's priced correctly, um, by the agents. So that's what we're envisaging, um, in the next few months in the
Thanks for
marketplace.
that, Taj. Just a follow up. You've been talking about buyers and you've been talking about sellers. In the US, we've had a market in real estate where the seller has a listing agent. The agent puts the property on the market,
Yeah,
markets it through the MLS system, advertises it to
yeah,
various outlets, social media, newspapers, and all the other means of getting the word out there. Buyers have gone out and they've gone looking for property and they've usually signed up with a buyer's agent. And most recently in the American real estate market, what we've encountered is there was a lawsuit against the National Association of Realtors. So, one,
Hmm.
in America, there's a National Association of Realtors. Each state has their Association of Realtors, and various districts, counties, cities have their own associations where realtors come together professionally and they deal with the market on a sort of networking basis. The buyer's agent and the seller's agent, the system used to allow them to split the commission that was being paid
Yeah.
to the realtors. Basically, the listing agent, I'm the listing agent, I list this property, and I agree with the seller that they're going to pay 4%. You bring the buyer, we tend to split the commission. I get half, you get half. And if there's other
Hmm.
people in the deal, it gets a division based on how they're involved. This lawsuit challenged the Association of Realtors into saying that this was forced upon sellers, that they had to pay the buyer's commission. In the recent weeks, we've had changes in the industry where the National Association and the local associations have implemented changes into the MLS system, the multiple listing service, and through the association, state contracts and all alike. Now, I, as a listing agent, make an agreement with the seller. I get whatever the commission I've agreed, but I don't have to publicize the buyer's agent split. On the side, we can still negotiate that, but what's been an industry practice for years in the past has now come to a drastic storm, and it's undergoing change. So we're going to have a ripple effect and some sort of ironing out of the creases from where we go after this lawsuit. What's the situation in England? Do you have a buyer's agent and a seller's agent, or is it just one-stop shop? I want to buy a house, I come to you. I want to sell a house, I come to you, and you're
Yeah.
marketing it, my house to sell, and the buyers are coming to you, and you're the one who's dealing with the commission, and you're not splitting it with anybody. How does it work?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm familiar with what you just basically detailed about the American market because from experience, I sold a house in Florida back in 2009, and I was familiar with what happened then. You know, so yeah, I get the picture in the States. Now in the UK, generally, it's always been and it as far as I'm aware, it's always been the selling agent that's effectively getting paid the commission for the client. So the selling agent is representing the seller. The seller has agreed a commission with the agent, and with when that house sells, the seller will pay the agent that agreed commission. And the commissions in the UK, averaged around the 1%. They have slightly increased now. So you have agents between 1% and 2%. Some are, the really experienced agents and the ones that are on the high end of the market. They're probably between 2% and 3%. Um, but it's still, what I always say, small fry compared to what you guys have been charging. In terms of making any money from the buyer, no, um, that hasn't happened. But saying that, Paji, there's no law in the UK that says you can't represent your buyer as well. So it's only recently which has come to my sort of attention that I can represent a buyer and I can basically you know find and source properties for that buyer. Um, but what you can't do is you can't have a conflict of interest. You can't have that one property where you're basically selling for the seller and then you've got a buyer buying that property as well, because that's conflict of interest. So you've got to have a separate arrangement. Um, whereby if your buyer is buying a property and you're going to represent your buyer and you're going to charge him a fee, you got to make sure it's not the property you're selling. Okay. Um, but there's nothing stopping agents in the UK actually representing buyers, but nobody does it. Nobody does it. Um, and I think it's more to do with the fact that if I'm a buyer and I'm looking at a property, you have MLS, we have Rightmove, we have Zoopla, they're the main portals. And if I'm going to start my search, I'm going to go on those portals and that's the way I'm going to source my property. So then I think, do I need an agent to help me um, with my sourcing, with my buying? Um, Probably not. If you're in that same town you're looking at, I think it will help and be more beneficial. Let's say if I was a buyer and I lived in London and I was looking to buy in Derby, obviously then yes, I'd be thinking to myself, you know what, I haven't got the time. I've got a real busy job. It might be best if I employ an agent to help me sort of find my property for me. And I work with an agent, and I'm happy to pay that agent. So
I quite follow. So basically, then, if I'm the buyer, and whether I be in the US or in London, I'm in a different city, I want the convenience of an agent to do the research and the runaround. Then I, as a buyer, am paying my agent, not a seller's component. So,
yeah,
from
yeah,
what I've heard from you, Taj, is I, as a buyer, can come into your office and say, I want to look at this property. I sign up to buy it. You're the listing agent or you're the seller's agent. Do I need to have somebody represent me, or am I just jumping in the pool with sharks in there, not knowing what's out there? The reason I'm asking this question
mm,
is, what if the property that's being sold has a whole bunch of liens on it, which are historically there, or there's
yeah,
issues with the property, for argument's sake, dry rot, which is common in some of the properties
yeah,
here. Your
yeah,
properties are constructed mainly bricks and cinder block. We have a lot of wood frame housing. I think in England
yeah,
there are some wood frame houses. So the elements have a factor in this. Damp in England is pretty common. So how, as a buyer, do I assure myself that I've done my due diligence, but I'm working with you and I'm
yeah,
trusting you to tell me, but you're interested to only serve the seller. So where's
yeah.
that balance?
Okay. Yeah, good question. First of all, we are bound by duty code of conduct as estate agents. I mean, you probably have the same as realtors in the US. So we are members of the Property Ombudsman, the TPO here, as agents, and I'm also affiliated with the Property Mark Code of Conduct, which basically means, even though your seller vendor is paying you, you're representing another client, which is the buyer who's not paying you. And you have a duty of care to make sure that all material facts about that property that you're aware of are disclosed. So you cannot, as an agent, hoodwinkle any buyer on a property. And the other thing is, when a buyer basically decides that I'm going to purchase this property, then the buyer will carry out a survey, and that's carried out by a chartered surveyor. So that survey will pick up any defaults, any structural issues, any dry rot, damp. So the buyer will have a good understanding on the makeup and the fabric of that property as well. Okay. Now, you mentioned liens, and I think they are like, we would call them um, charges on a property. There'll be like legal restrictions, and they will all get picked up by the buyer's lawyer. Now, we use conveyancers, solicitors for that process. So during the conveyancing process, when a buyer is basically put the offer in, and he's going to buy that property, then that process, that conveyancing process, will kick in, and that buyer's lawyer will look at the title plan, will look at the registry, will look at all the deeds of the property, and make sure that there's nothing like liens on that property that the buyer is not aware of, and all the legalities will get picked up from that perspective. So a buyer has a lot of protection, Paji, in the UK, in the sense that even though the agent is representing the seller, the buyer's basically lawyer is making sure that they're not buying a dud property. It's got untold liens on it, um, and also from the structural point of view, the survey. The surveyor will make sure that the buyer is buying a property which is sound construction, and if there's anything in there that gets flagged up, then that's a conversation between the agent and the seller. Um, that look, the buyers had the survey done, the survey's picked up this. There's an extra element of cost which is going to be attributed to this. This needs to be renegotiated in the price. So to answer your
Okay.
question, no, the buyers have a lot of protection in the UK here,
Okay. Well, thank
and
you
and the
on that,
key thing
Taj.
is, yeah, and the
There's
key thing is, like I said, if you're a proper agent, you got to follow your code of conduct as well. You got to make
true,
sure
true.
you are representing both
Um,
the
I think
buyer and the client.
from your description there, what we have picked up is the protections for the buyer, the protections for the seller, obligations, and the goodwill, the trust factors. I think what we've determined, and we'll have to discuss this in the future, what we
Mm,
call title companies, where they're registering the sale of the property and doing the title transfers. What you're calling is conveyance, and your surveyor and your buyer's lawyer.
yeah,
We have those options, but usually the title company does the searches on all that stuff. And yes, we have protections where the buyer can have property inspected. Um, Various features of property can be inspected from by property inspectors. For example, if you got a well on the property, you might have a environmental company come in and check the well and other components. So
yeah,
we've had quite a detailed discussion, Taj, and we have a lot of open areas to discuss comparisons and ways
yeah,
people can go around it. Let's keep those open. And for today's session, I
sure,
think we conclude from factors of time, and we'll follow on this discussion in the future. ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੇਖ ਰਹੇ ਹੋ ਅੱਜ ਕੱਲ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਸਾਂਝੀ ਸੋਚ ਟੀਵੀ ਤੇ ਮੈਂ ਇੰਦਰਜੀਤ ਕਾਲੀਰਾਏ ਆਪਣੀ ਗੱਲ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ ਸੀ ਰੀਅਲ ਏਸਟੇਟ ਬਾਰੇ ਜੋ ਹਰੇਕ ਪਰਿਵਾਰ ਹੈਗਾ ਉਹ ਆਪਣਾ ਸੋਚਦੇ ਆ ਵੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਘਰ ਬਣਾਈਏ ਆਪਾਂ ਘਰ ਖਰੀਦੀਏ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਬੱਚੇ ਸਕੂਲ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਨੇ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਕੰਮ ਕਰਦੇ ਨੇ ਔਰ ਕਈ ਵਾਰੀ ਆਪਣਾ ਘਰ ਵੇਚ ਕੇ ਹੋਰ ਲੈਣੇ ਦੀ ਸਲਾਹ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਆ ਇਸ ਕਾਰਨ ਆਪਾਂ ਇੰਗਲੈਂਡ ਦੇ ਕੰਪੈਰੀਜ਼ਨ ਕੀਤੇ ਨੇ ਜੋ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਚੱਲ ਰਿਹਾ market halat ki hai, mortgage the situation ki hai. Thank you, Taj Gill, for joining us from all the way across the river in England, and we look
no,
forward to
thank you
discussing
for
with you
inviting me.
further. But all the best, and thank you. We'll discuss further later.
Thank you.
Azaz de milte hain